Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to SEGA Genesis All-Stars. Hope everyone's having a good time at the show.
Yeah.
All right. How many people have spent money? We have? This is amazing. So I've been dying to come to the show for like 4 years, and some of the years were tougher, and we didn't get together last time. It's so overwhelming, it really is, and I've been to a lot of shows. It's just really impressive how much stuff there is. So it causes you to kind of ask yourself the question, why do we do this? What in this vast exhibit hall is important to me? And then you kind of, and some of you know, like we love SEGA Genesis, right?
Yeah.
Genesis players? Right on. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. What is this, that is important? There is a ton of media. And this is great that it concentrates it all one place. So it's possible a couple of you may remember who I am. My name is Desmond Crisis. I used to work for a little tiny company called CNET. When they were starting, I was one of the first 50 people there. It was a television show we used to make for USA Network and Sci-Fi Channel. And to give you an idea of the era of this thing, is the audition that I did was, they gave me a camera crew and I went down to Mountain View and I interviewed both people who worked at Yahoo, right? So it gives you a certain perspective. Dave, Jerry, both there. Crazy stories. But what happens is I've got this really rare opportunity to be in the front row of the birth of a lot of the consumer internet and a lot of technologies and a huge boom of video game systems, right? Your Dreamcast comes out, the 3DO comes out. I mean, a lot of crazy machines. Saturn, it's every week there was like a new one for me to talk about on television. So it was the perfect time and the perfect place to see all the stuff. But they said, gosh, Desmond, you're just so smart. How do you do this? And it turns out I actually had an edge. I used to be a SEGA Genesis developer with this team here. So we look like we all know each other. There's a reason for that. And so the title is called SEGA Genesis All-Stars because what happens is the Genesis is really the first one of the machines that needs content. I was in Howard Scott Warshaw's talk earlier today. How many of you made that? Yeah. Howard's fantastic, it's great. But one of the things you kind of pick up from what he's saying in the early days of Atari is these engineers were left on their own. Somewhat unsupervised, but also unsupervised. They could do the things that they needed to do, but they could do it. The artist is the designer, is the programmer, is writing the storyboards. This is one person because they're working with what they've got. It's amazing, but they're working with what they've got. So the Genesis happens to be the event horizon where you need a crew. And what happens is if you're well positioned, and Randel will talk to you a little bit about his background, if you're well positioned, if you look carefully, you can find that crew. You can find these people. So this story is really how you build a SEGA Genesis dream team to be able to incorporate the better art. You use that space, use the more than 4 colors that you've been given, because now you have a creative team and there's a cohesion, there's a way that these people gel. And as we're going through this, I want you to think about it. Some of you, how many of you are developing something, actually building something on any platform, programming, storyboarding, thinking it through, having a dream, any of that? Here is your inspiration. You're gonna have a hard time doing it alone, but look at who you know. The right people are out there, and a lot of them don't know it yet. So as you meet this team, think about your own crew. Think about, I really would like to offload the art to somebody who really understands art better than me. Start thinking about your strategy, because this is teamwork for development in a SEGA Genesis environment where it's necessary. And that all translates now to this too. So we start out with this young fella. And this is Randel Reiss. Only some people are allowed to call him Randy, and they have to pay him. Yeah. Randel, tell us your start, where you realize that this is something that's going to be necessary.
All right, well, thank you, Desmond. Yeah, I came in from working with Apple Computer for a long time, Electronic Arts. I was the 50th employee at Electronic Arts. And mostly what I was doing back in that day was Macintosh utility software, productivity software, music development software. And I had little crossover with games. One of them was I happened to be lucky enough to work on a Maze Wars game that came out for the old Macintosh computer, which is how I met Jay Fenton and Jamie Fenton now, and Mark Cantor at Macromind. And so that's where I came into the game industry from.
One of the things that happens in every stage of this is there's always somebody doing something that hasn't been done before, and you're going to see that happens in the career that we had as this team, and in between TV shows and stuff. I actually worked here, and then I worked another place. But one of the things that was always happening is somebody's always doing something that had never been done before. You could use the word innovation, but it's not the spark. It's not the thing that drives you. It's not the thing that completes the level. So, Randel, what was the breakthrough, like the thing that had never been done before that really set you into motion?
Well, we spotted that the SEGA Genesis had the same guts as the Macintosh, so that helped a lot. And so I and the rest of the team built an entire development system on the Macintosh, and so we could do coding and prototyping really fast on the Macintosh. Everybody else was using very customized hardware and struggling and peeking and poking, hardware and address memory, and we could just simulate the entire SEGA Genesis on the Mac. So here you see on the slide, SEGA started off Technopop. I was doing things like the old Space War game you might recognize, the two ships fighting around the sun. So built this prototype of ships flying around the sun and shooting at each other, multiplayer, sound, scores, all these things. SEGA was really excited and asked for the product to be distributed. They bought it from me and distributed it to all the SEGA developers, and it turns out there's probably a piece of this in every SEGA Genesis game that you've seen, because this was the sample code of how to do development on the SEGA Genesis. In fact, one of the reasons I put the emulator picture there is everyone looks at the SEGA Genesis cube black box. The way we saw the SEGA Genesis was through that in-circuit emulator in the corner. And I don't know if people have seen the visitor cart. It's a famous cart. When I was bringing in the Space War game, I used to go in and out of SEGA all the time. They always had these visitor stickers, so I took one and put it on the cart, and suddenly it became the visitor game, as it passed around. But that's how I started at the beginning of the team.
Well, you got to have a name for things, right? And of course, everybody has, like Bob the Coffee Robot and stuff like this. So don't feel bad when you do that. Everybody does it, right? So what happens is now you have a developer who's doing things that have never been done before, and this groundbreaking new platform, emulating the environment in a Macintosh, which I think they kind of discouraged at one point when they realized it was too easy and they couldn't sell a dev kit. I don't know why. I wasn't there yet. But now you've got, I would call him the trunk of the tree, right? This is the person who's connected, who is building the things, who understands the core of what's happening, but his artwork, yeah, you need, it's time to focus on the thing. The thing is complicated now, and you have to focus on it. Now you need to pull other people in so that you can start distributing the creativity instead of bottlenecking it, because you just can't do that on this big of a thing. So Randel reaches out into his network. Some of these people you know before, some of these people you meet along the way, but it's a journey. And Scott Haile arrives. Scott, tell us a bit about your background and how you wound up on this team.
Especially that upper left photo.
Yeah, thanks for putting it in. I originally was a fine artist in Los Angeles in this counterculture art movement called lowbrow art. I used to do sculptures, cartoons. I did a lot of time at San Diego Comic-Con, where I would make little figurines and cartoons. I did work so fast that I would make commentary on what was happening in the comics at that moment in sculpture form as a joke. And therefore the artists would come in and go, that's the story I just wrote, that's cool. So I sold most of my stuff to the artists, never got to the public. And from doing fine art in LA, if you live in LA, you're gonna work in motion pictures. You don't have a choice, it's kind of required. So I ended up moving into costume design and fabrication and set design for film and theater and television. And the production company I worked with quite often worked on this big project in Japan for Hello Kitty. So I'm in Japan working on Hello Kitty robots and Hello Kitty monsters and Hello Kitty things and theme songs for this gigantic indoor super robotic theme park called Puroland. And I was supposed to go for a week, and a year later, I finally get home, and Randel, who I get to call Randy, that I'd known for a long time, for years had always been, he'd put computers in my house and say, try this, play with this Apple thing. Here's an Apple, here's a computer, just do some art. No, there's no art to it, just do some art, try something out. And I get off the plane in San Francisco, planning entirely to go back to Hollywood. And I stop and see my friend Randel, who shows me his garage and kind of locks me in. And there's no artist in the time. So he said, why don't you just draw something on the computer for me? And next thing I know, I'm living there for about the first 3 months.
You have to look at this because you have to explain this cow.
just lets me do whatever I want on the computer. He says, this is important. We're making tools for this new game machine. And I don't know what a game machine is. And it's a toy that you can play, and you can play video games. And I had a game, what was it, a Game Boy. One of the first ones, I got it when I was in Japan. I couldn't play any of the games because I couldn't read any of the instructions. Tetris was the only game I could play. I tried other games. I could just make the little characters hitting the wall. I can't do anything. It's frustrated. And he says it's like that. And we're making these tools on the Mac, and I keep making movies. And I make this one, it was a tool just to test the, was it the boundaries?
It was teaching you the boundaries, the collision boundaries.
The collision control, yes.
Yes, and we needed a kung fu fighting game, or any type of fighting game.
Yes,
SEGA demanded we do a fighting game.
But because I was the only artist probably within a 50-mile radius, I got to make whatever I wanted. And I thought kung fu went with cows. And I don't know why, but it did. It still makes sense to me this day. So I made a kung fu fighting cow game, and they forced to build an entire game around it.
Yeah.
Bessie's Revenge.
So at what point did you think Randel was crazy?
When I first met him in '84.
And now, at what point did you know Randel was crazy?
When he locked him in the garage.
Well, the thing is that
Draw something.
all time with Randy was like being locked in a garage. So it didn't make any difference to me. We had no idea what we were building at the time. I was just making some funny cartoons.
We call that creative drive.
He went away with the cartoons and somehow came back from Sega with money, so it was fine to me.
That is kind of how it works now. And speaking of coming back with a project and money, tell us about this.
This is where I really messed up. Because I was used to doing things in the motion picture industry, where we all share resources and we talk about what movie you're working on. Well, I'll tell you, it's this. And what are you working on? I say, I'm working on this with this guy, and we're all sharing because everyone works on movies with everyone else. I was not ready for the fact that in the technology industry, everyone keeps their resources and projects secret. And no one shares anything, and no one tells anyone anything, because we don't want you to know what we're doing, because you might do it. And we don't want to know, because we're all paranoid like crazy people. And we're going to meet with Sega. And I came from the Comic-Con world, and Sega says about this one little project, you know, Randel and your team, we're thinking about you guys working on Spider-Man. And I go, Spider-Man? Oh, boy! And I'm all excited, yes, we can do Spider-Man. And I'm all like, and Randel was trying to negotiate a price.
I'm trying to negotiate the contract. He's
Like,
sketching on the pad. He sketches this sketch.
This is pretty difficult. We can't possibly do this.
Oh, it's
yeah,
gonna
we
need
can.
lots of money.
Oh, boy, I love Spider-Man.
And so I put my hand over the pad while he's drawing this. I'm like, dude, that's our first milestone. What are you doing?
They're describing the project, and like a product designer, I'm just drawing everything they're saying so I can have that's how I take notes.
Yeah. And
I storyboarded the entire project. We didn't know. We just created a new procedure step for the game industry. You can storyboard.
Yeah.
They didn't know that.
And they didn't know that they didn't have to, or that they couldn't do that. You know, everybody else didn't really apply this kind of workflow to
I
it.
didn't know you could get paid for it.
Yeah, so then we went on, we started Spider-Man, and I did all of the enemy AI, all the background work, the level layouts. So here's an example of Scott and I communicating with each other in a really fast pace using the Mac. Scott, you know, as we determined that Doc Ock was going to be sensitive in the center, Scott could give me a bounding box in the center of Doc Ock in the artwork so that I could look for it in the code. And he did the same thing with the Lizard Man. There's a little box that's hard to see at the end of the Lizard Man's tail that I can use as a strike point in the code. So we were learning to communicate with each other back and forth between the art that Scott was doing and the code that I was doing really fast on the Mac. And I think we really were ahead of a lot of the other folks that were doing SEGA Genesis development. And Scott's going to have to explain this slide.
Well, the constraints were really difficult to communicate. So we're working with Randel, a programmer, and they wanted to animate things. And I understand animation, but they didn't understand animation. They would say, well, you got 2 frames. And I go, well, you can't actually animate something with 2 frames. You need more than that. And they were forcing me to, the constraints of the machine, the constraints of memory, were forcing us to get tighter and tighter and tighter how to try and create a visual explanation of movement when you have nothing moving.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is the one we had a nice artist helping us. So we had to have him fight a dog. We had to try and find a way to make a dog move in 2 frames and get hit and die in 1 frame.
But we got the letter from SEGA, you know, remove the dead dog frame. Nobody likes the dead dog frame. It's like, well,
It's a running upside down dog.
yeah, it's not dead. Yeah.
Just crusty.
So
Rigid.
Game designer right there.
So SEGA makes a request that I think all of you will appreciate. They make this request that we were just staring at it like shocked. They said, well, then make the dog invincible. We're like, are you kidding? Making an invincible enemy in a game?
Yeah.
On the 2nd level? Like, if people will kill themselves. They'll be sitting there for hours and days
Yeah.
trying to kill this.
We didn't even want to put a dog in.
Yeah.
They demanded we put a dog in.
Yeah.
They demanded the dog attack Spider-Man.
Yeah?
Then they demanded that the dog not get hurt by Spider-Man.
So it's the reason why the dog has a lot of hit points and is hard to kill.
This is the part of the show where Randall's apologizing for the dog in Spider-Man. It kind of comes up every time.
the dog just became
Sorry about that. Just keep moving.
Again, it's another example of Scott and I communicating with each other. So he spent many nights getting this nice forklift working and had to apologize with a memo he left in the artwork for me to incorporate in the game the next day, apologizing that he used half the available colors that could be displayed, you know, on the screen in this one, you know, prop.
I think we went through a lot of work creating new methods for artists to talk to programmers
Yeah.
at this time.
Right.
For example, the SEGA Genesis, if you guys probably know, it's got extreme limited palettes to it. So they would tell me, you've got 16 colors. I go, I have to do everything 16 colors? They go, yes, but you have millions of colors. And wait a minute, what? No, you have 16 colors at a time. Okay, only 16 colors at a time? Yes, but multiple 16 colors at a time. Wait, what? 16 colors, multiple at a time, but millions of colors, as many as you want, but only 16. Oh, but you can't use one of those. So you can only use 15 out of the 16 colors, and you can have as many of those colors as you want, but only 16, and you can have 4 or 5 of these 16 at a time, but only 1 can you use. Simple.
Thinking like an artist, right?
Yeah.
Sega got us approval to add Venom to the game very, very late, so I had to break that news to Scott that he was going to have to reanimate essentially another Spider-Man.
In millions of colors,
Yeah,
but only 16, which you
16
can't
at a
use.
That's okay, because he's got 1 color. His Venom is black.
Yeah. This is another example of the work process procedure that you had developed. The line art, rough concept, line art. and
This is one of the ones I did in the room that I got in trouble for.
Oh, yeah. Just doing it too
Just talking
soon,
about-
that's all.
Yeah, that first sketch I did when the producer was talking to us in the room. Randall got it mad at me for.
That got him locked up again.
And it paid off.
Yeah.
So the amazing thing about that is Glenn Murakami, I believe
Yeah.
his name was. Yeah. So there was a kid I knew that worked in a comic book store in Los Angeles that was really good at doing quick comic book art, and we got him to do this work for us. And that portfolio turned into something that ultimately led him to being one of the top producers of Warner
Yeah,
Brothers Animation.
We were not allowed to
the
use
Batman project.
any prior Marvel art whatsoever. No prior Marvel art, no prior Marvel text. I never understood why, but that was the restriction that we had to do. So everything had to be created in the likeness of Marvel. But it worked. I mean, thanks to everybody here and others, you know, the game did really well.
Incredibly tight production.
Scott took his skill set after working on Spider-Man
And did his own thing.
Why did you look up that way when I showed the X-Men?
So it was so early. I don't
Just
think you mentioned the Spider-Man for the Sega Genesis was the first produced game in the United States for the Sega Genesis. And we created the tools and the procedures that went on to other things. Right after that game came out, Sega asked me to go and try and teach some of these techniques to other companies.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the name of the company. Was Western Digital or?
No, Western
Well,
Digital was one that did the 6502 processor I was talking to all the time.
I went to Los Angeles to try and teach.
Or Western
and
Design Center.
There weren't a lot of artists, as we're talking about, but there were a lot of programmers trying to learn how to do art.
Yeah.
Because they were the ones putting it on the screen, they were the ones that should be making the art. And I'm trying to teach animation to a bunch of people that couldn't really draw.
But now you did all the animation for
Yes, I ended up-
Wolverine, Gambit.
I ended up doing most of the work for that team.
Yeah, great work.
So this goes from a team of 2 people, a fundamental programmer who's really intimate with the workings of the machine, and a fine artist who is now learning to work in this environment, and the workflows are being created, and they're starting to spread to the other industry, into other products. So now you see that workflows start becoming a word, right? They didn't even really do that before. And this leads to something really, really amazing, and it's called Randel in a tie. Randel in a tie is how I met Randel. And he was working for this company. I'll let him tell the story in a minute. But essentially what happens is he's now an inventor, an innovator, a foundational creator of tools and things. We need more of these games built. We need them built on other platforms. And along comes Asky. How'd they find you?
Oh, it was Steve Hanwha, the president of Asky. He was one of the executives working at SEGA. He really enjoyed the work that Scott and I had done on Spider-Man. So he just wanted us to kind of reproduce that within Asky. And that's where we ran into Justin.
There he is.
Yeah, I'm the guy who just says, and Justin.
Yeah.
It's and Justin.
I want to make sure my friend here gets credit.
Yes.
And Justin Wolf.
Justin was a brilliant young programmer that was working at Asky, and he joined the team. There were some other great people at Asky. Parker Davis is in the shot. He ended up doing levels for Terminator vs. RoboCop on the SEGA Genesis. Some great levels for, I think he designed the whole game of the Jurassic Park Lost World on one of the other platforms, and became a very prominent producer. Tim Ryan's, in there with us, who went on to do Mech Commander and has produced a whole bunch of games. And of course, Jeff Davies was a very talented programmer who was a really good sport. Because while we were there, we ended up working on a soccer game, and this was the first time we'd experimented with putting one of the staff in the game. And since Jeff Davies was such a good sport and had thick skin, we put him in the soccer game and we gave him all the weakest stats. And then in the manual, it says, we recommend trading Jeff Davies first.
And for some reason, he still talks to some of us. Yeah. He's not here, though.
Yeah, no.
No, Jeff's awesome. I talked to him on Facebook. He just couldn't make it.
Now you can explain this.
Yeah.
Back when Desmond had hair.
You see that? Don't do this, kids. Sometimes it sent me postcards when it retired for like the first couple of years, but it doesn't call it right anymore. So what happened was I was a college radio disc jockey, and I was playing a lot of cyberpunk, and I was a ham radio guy. So I used to talk on ham radio, and I was working this job. I was on a law enforcement track before this. And what happens if you're a security guard, the more you talk on a walkie-talkie, the more it looks like you're working, right? Supposedly I was talking to Randel, we started getting to know each other, right? This is this kind of networking you do amongst the group, the people you haven't found yet, and how you find them is you go, you know what, it is the right person. He says, you could probably help keep our shop running. You know how to do these things. So then, I get recruited at Asky, and mysteriously my hair starts growing out blue. I'll take just a second to tell what my story is here. I worked at Asky for a while, and I was supporting the product development team, keeping the show on the road. And they would start taking me to trade shows. But I'm suddenly liberated from having to work in a uniform, and I'm having some fun and doing my thing and DJing in clubs. Shout out to my buddy Peter here, who ran some of those clubs, who let me play there. But this is the kind of thing that we did. Well, they took me to CES, and really had 2 CESs a year. And then what happened was, I really enjoy talking about this stuff, and I get to work with the guys who are inventing it. I'm telling you today, this is the thing I love to do. The important, groundbreaking things that we did, the superlatives. We had so many firsts. It was just so much fun to be part of this team that I told the stories on television. Until finally somebody said, why don't you just come tell all the stories on television? I said, hey, can you guys live without me for a little? They said, yeah, go do it. So I had fun with that, and that's kind of, I come and go from the team a couple times, but this is basically what, look, some of your crazy friends might not be a bad idea.
Then we joined up with Lasse.
Lasse, yeah.
Who has to explain these 4 images?
I can't even see that for you.
Oh, it's Battle Squadron and Sword of Sodan. Do you have any explanation for your involvement with those 2 SEGA Genesis titles?
Well, for Battle Squadron and Sword of Sudan, I wasn't actually an engineer on those projects. But I did work at a company, and actually one of my co-workers who was there a long time ago, Evo sits in the second row here. Yeah, we worked at a small company in Huntsville, Maryland, developing games. Several Danish people, Dutch people, all very young, working for, well, let's just say we were lucky when we got a paycheck. It usually didn't happen. So eventually left that company, went home, and through sort of a roundabout way, I ended up with a SEGA Genesis development system. And I was sitting in my bedroom in my parents' house deciding, I'm going to make a game for this thing.
Nice.
So I always loved racing games, and so I started working on this game that eventually became Double Clutch.
The first and only 3-player game for the Sega Genesis.
That's right. Ended up using the serial port on the back of the Sega Genesis. The early Sega Genesis
Yeah,
had a
Gen
serial
1.
port in the back. They later nexted that, but we used that to make a little dongle so you could put in a third controller and you could play 3 players at the same time.
So that's another one of the firsts. We had the first 3-player Sega Genesis machine because, you know, the expansion port, they had the back of the Rev 1 Genesis. Like,
Yeah.
expand to what, right? Well, it turned out Lasse figured out how to write a driver for it and use a gender, it's just a gender changer, right? And you can put a third player port.
yeah, correct.
So if somehow you can find a ROM to double clutch, and I'm not listening to any of this.
And the very old Genesis.
Yeah, it has to be the Rev 1 Genesis, but I'm sure there's like 50 of them out on the floor. Now you have a reason. It's like, no, my Rev 2 Genesis is not good enough. I need a Rev 1 Genesis.
Now it's worth $1,000.
Yeah, now when I started, it was only worth, now it's $1,000. But what was interesting is from a product development point of view, Justin was already there and he was plugged in. I don't know where he came from. But one day they said, look at this piece of code. Look at this amazing thing. One day this ROM shows up and said, Desmond, burn this card. And I look, burn this card. Wow, this is really great. Who is this guy? He's like, some guy we found in Denmark. He's like, it snows all the time. They've got nothing else to do. So he got a dev kit. He's actually really good. Check it out. So Lasse joins the team. And now we've got a real stable of programs. But here's one of the things. Like, sometimes people do things that they've been taught how to do, and they do it a certain way. Some people teach themselves, like Randel in the foundational days, teaches himself how to do these things. And that means nobody taught him what not to do, right? So Lasse, being a very independent programmer and coming into this environment, now has outside-of-the-box ideas and codes, and that is a critical part of zero tolerance.
Right. So that,
Oh.
Tony joined the team. And Tony, could you explain where you worked before you joined us?
Yeah, what were you doing? What were you doing before Asky, Tony?
Yeah.
I like the fact that you moved the mic right in my face.
We want to hear this.
I was working at Blockbuster.
Yay, Blockbuster!
those
Come
of you
on!
Which, before you clap, it is like PTSD when I go near that room. And I was telling Brown, and I call him Randall. I refuse to call you Randy.
Okay.
But I was kind of cleaning out my house, and I actually found my employee badge for Blockbuster, but I just couldn't bring it. I couldn't. Too many memories. Anyways, one day I was talking to my coworker, and he's asking me about a game. He can't pass a game, and he's talking to me about a level, and I'm just sitting there, and I've got these customers in front of me that I'm ignoring, and I tell him how to beat the level, and he's like, I don't understand. So I said, well, just call the hint line when they still had hint lines, and he said, what's the number? And I rattled off from memory, and this guy's
LucasArts.
to LucasArts,
Yeah.
and he's in front of me. I don't know who he is from Adam, and basically.
It was I and Joellen helped us with Spider-Man.
And he turns and he goes, is that number right? She goes, I think so. And he asked me a couple questions, and he said, well, how'd you like to play video games for a living? You know, I'm this like 18-year-old kid. The only thing I can say, I'm not a programmer, I am not an artist, I'm not a musician, but I live and breathe video games. I still live and breathe video games, probably much like many of you in here. And it was just kind of like it was one of those things where like, this is going to be absolutely the most amazing opportunity, or this guy is full of it, and he probably locks people in rooms somewhere.
Well, just remember, Tony.
So I was like, you know, I basically like said, give me your card. He gave me a card. Finished checking him out so he can get his movie and go. And then I turned to my store manager and said, like, that's my 2 weeks right there. And then it stood for about 3 months, but it took him to bring me on. And then that was my birth into the video game industry. And I started in doing QA at Asky. They basically would put everything in front of me.
Soccer
games, whatever it is. I was a fighting game guy. So Street Fighter 2, they basically put all these games in front of me, the Tessie Asky pad, and I met all these great people that I'm still friends with today.
And that's the thing about QA. And haven't any of you guys done QA, like game testing? Testers here. That's why we all have the same mantra.
Heart and soul of the gaming industry right there, the QA guys.
Yeah. But that's where we came up with a motto when everyone says, oh, that's a dream, you get to play video games for a living. You go, that's right. Every nightmare begins as a dream.
Yeah, just
the motto mantra of QA.
You'll have to test games like Mary-Kate and Ashley, Mystery Mall, Teletubbies, Land Before Time.
Artie Lightfoot.
And Artie Lightfoot.
Artie Lightfoot was good. I loved Artie Lightfoot.
He will always defend Artie. Artie, this is what happens when you work. Asky's a Japanese company, and Askyware or Asky Entertainment Software USA was something that sometimes localized a lot of the Japanese product. When we weren't, we build this stuff, they'd let us do this as long as we did things like try to localize some of the Japanese titles and then do some work on the hardware, the Asky pad and stuff.
Right, like tell them that Artie Lightfoot cannot be smoking through the game.
Yeah, sometimes it's not tech, it's cultural, and yes, we don't really have characters that smoke in our video games in the United States. Like, why not? Everybody smokes.
And we kill dogs.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you people?
They're invincible dogs.
Tony has a bit of a PTSD from Spellcraft because he made the mistake of finding a bug near the end of the game.
On a Friday.
It almost shipped.
Yeah. And we needed him to videotape it more.
Yeah.
At the end of the game.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
So like 4 hours.
in those days, basically, you had to do the playthrough for your submission, and basically you had to go through on a VHS tape. Y'all remember what those were? Then basically you had to kind of go through the game beginning to end to show you could, and then you submit that with your submission in your ROM. And so what happened is I found it. It took about 6 hours to 7 hours to get through the game. I found it at the end of the day, Friday, and basically Randel goes like, okay, well, we got to get the submission in by Monday, so we're gonna need you on. We're gonna need you to come in on the weekend.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they found the bug and then fixed the bug. I had to test it on Saturday, and then he said, we're gonna need you to come in tomorrow to
play through and record it again.
So I know that pretty well.
So his reward for finishing Spellcraft, I mean, it's the finished game. It never came out on the SNES. The only legit copy of Spellcraft on the Super Nintendo is here, and this is the only commercial box. So Josh wanted to make sure that I mention this because they're going to be on the auction tonight.
The only box one. So
And the only legit card.
So you guys know I will not be bidding on that.
we can't afford it.
Yeah.
But Spellcraft was a pretty amazing game. It's almost like it's an adventure, but it's around you crafting your own spells from found ingredients, right? Like they call this Minecraft now, but essentially that was how they did it back then. And this is the 90s. This is not 92.
Yeah, no, you're right, because you alchemize the spells through ingredients and Spellcraft. It was really a very, very cool game. And then when we did Dominus, essentially we're doing the same thing. You would breed these creatures together to make your own creatures long before anybody was doing that type of stuff. So it was a lot of fun.
And the crash book is fixed. So.
It's okay to play it now, folks. It's safe. But there's still only one.
By the way, that was Jeff Davies' bug, by the way.
Okay. This being recorded, so it'll be on YouTube.
Yeah, you're dead now. Witness protection plan is already on order for Tony. So here we have the dream team. We have the people who have the skills. We've got coders who are working outside of the box. We've got artists who know how to build these things, and we finally get let go for Asky. It allows us to open a company called Technopop, and Technopop goes back to the core of what really started this whole story. Randel gets to open up a new shop. He gets to do the thing that he wants, and now we've learned a lot of stuff about what the Genesis can do and how to do that. And Randel gets to build his favorite game, the dream that he has always had, and it's called Zero Tolerance.
Yeah, since high school. So one of the reasons I put the logo at the bottom is this caused a bit of a stir. So as Tony was mentioning, we have to be very careful with the submissions. We're getting very near the end of the game. We're doing submissions to Sega. We have the logo rotating. You cannot muck with the Sega logo. You just can't. We got in enough trouble. We started the Spider-Man music while the Sega logo was up. So we weren't done causing problems. So between the builds, we show the Sega logo rotating. Goes into Sega. There's a civil war at Sega. Half of Sega says, you violated all of our submission process, you touched our logo, you're in trouble. The other half of Sega goes, oh my God, this is great. Nintendo's over there working on the FX chip and say they can only do 3D. We're doing 3D over here in the SEGA Genesis. This is the coolest logo ever. So luckily the right side won and it went out with that spinning logo.
That was one of my best days because what I did was I burned ROMs and then drove them over to Sega for these submission things because at every milestone that you build your stuff, you'd have to show it to Sega Prime, which is kind of ironic. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm speaking out of church here, but the guys who would review your code and decide it was safe were the coders who were building in-house product. We're looking at your stuff that was going to be on the shelf next to them. I always thought that was odd. And I could be missing things, I could be wrong, but what happened was that cart that he's showing you, they always told us, and this is when Doom is happening, right? Everybody's playing Doom, shut our place down for a month.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we learned networking better so that we could play Doom. So everyone was dying to get a behind-the-gun shooter on the Genesis, the Holy Grail. Everyone was trying to get to their console first. And they said, you will never have a scaling, rotating object that has an animated bitmap. The machine can't have it. Nobody knows this, but we're building a 32X because we have to do this. And we rolled in with this cart, and the first thing it pops up, and instead of just doing the wipe, it goes, whoop, 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 and SEGA. And you should have seen the jaws drop. I was watching the guys. I don't know what you were looking at, but the guys, oh my God. And they took that cart out of the machine before I could touch it and grabbed a screwdriver because they were positive.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
They were positive that we had engineered
Yeah.
some kind of graphics processor chip.
Yeah.
And we just obsoleted the 32X and run. It didn't go well. They did not publish this game. Accolade did.
Yeah, that's right. They passed on it. It was originally called Matrix when we were first submitting it to SEGA to give them a chance to do it. And they told us that Matrix was too technical of a name and there should never be an entertainment product called Matrix.
Our main character's name was Neo.
Yeah. So this was us designing the levels for Zero Tolerance. I wanted people to get an example of what it was like to prototype the levels and then put them in the game so that if anybody was disappointed about where the power-ups were on any given level in Zero Tolerance, Tony's here, he's going to be leaving through that door. He did all of that work.
Yeah, if you can't find the last med pack and you're down to like 1 heart and you just can't find it and you get creamed, Tony's your guy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
He's been wanting to say that for like 30 years.
It was a bad call, Ripley. It was a bad call.
SEGA wouldn't publish it. As a matter of fact, it was Accolade that was publishing carts outside of SEGA until the lawsuit settled that did it. That was the only way we got that thing to market. How many of you have played Zero Tolerance?
Yay.
Good game. How many of you played it head-to-head? I knew it. Oh, we got one over here, right? So if you'd actually gone through all these cards that Accolade had put in, there's a card that says, send this in and we'll give you free, we'll even pay the postage, a crossover cable that goes between the second player ports of 2 SEGA Genesis machines, and you can play it head-to-head, cooperative, or in deathmatch.
Same virtual world.
Yeah, so if you have 2 carts of Zero Tolerance and you can either build the pinouts or online for building this cable, you can play head-to-head. So another first.
Yeah.
A head-to-head, first locally networked console game.
And one of the people who's responsible for a lot of that heavy lifting, I want to point out, it's on the far left in the middle, that's Thomas Gita, next to Satoe. So he did a lot of the heavy lifting on Zero Tolerance for us, which is great. And then Satoe Ishii, you might recognize to the right of him, one of the players you can choose. Some of the players you might recognize, these are the original photos that Scott took of us to turn into the ID cards. Unfortunately, not all of us made it into the game. I didn't make it into the game.
Yeah, neither did I.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. He said, thanks. Anyway, it apparently worked.
Yeah, so when you're playing the game and you see the little ID card, the things at the bottom, these are the source files that those came from, so I hope you like them.
So it worked. I mean, we got top scores, and thanks to everyone here and other folks who are big fans of Zero Tolerance. In fact, it worked so well, we got lit up to do a sequel. And we contacted an artist. Scott, you really should comment on this, Yasushi Nirasawa.
Nirasawa-san was he was a friend that I made when I was working in Japan. Just an incredible artist. Became very famous for his monster work. He did some work on, what was the Final Fantasy first movie that came out? There was a 3D movie full of monsters that were really gross and sick and disgusting, because he was really good at gross and sick and disgusting. And he designed all the monsters for that, and he did some for one of the Godzilla properties as well, and was very, very popular with his actual sculptures in the collector's market. He started to show in museums in Japan as well, but because of my relationship, he agreed to come in and design some characters for the game, because Randel loved his work.
Yeah, I loved his work, yeah.
And he started out just to design some monsters for us, but because of his style and the fact that he really kind of enjoyed what he's doing, he designed entire worlds. He did environments and cities and backgrounds and guns and
I think the most mind-blowing part was, even though he didn't normally work on games, all of his conceptual monsters changed color themes as you were getting deeper into the game. And he knew that. He worked out the environments to match those color themes, the monsters to match those color themes as you were exploring deeper into the alien planet. It was very, very cool.
Yeah, beautiful.
Foresight on his part.
Beautiful. The problem is that his signature style was asymmetrical monsters, with one gigantic arm and one small arm, and we kept saying, can you do anything that we could use the same sides together, maybe save a little memory? And he went, yeah, sure, okay, but one side's bigger.
Yeah. And then there was another advancement that we did, which was we decided to start rotoscoping early on the SEGA Genesis. I don't think anybody was doing it before us. We built an entire sound stage. Deja Molnar, our musician, helped us again build the sound stage, and you were working with Karen Quest to get rotoscoping.
Yeah, I think we were very ahead of the curve on taking advantage, or finding a way to turn the limitations of the tools into advantage. We were early in Photoshop, didn't have layers yet, they only had channels. And we were able to use that to at least get blocked out areas to rotoscope. So we hired this woman, Karen Quest, who's a friend of mine, who's also a motion expert and a mime expert. She was trained as a clown. She went to clown school. And she would act out all the different monsters for us. And we would mostly get just a silhouette use out of what she did, but that was enough for us to turn to animation. So.
And again, she, without knowing anything about the games, she did have the foresight. She put together the leotards that you see on the lower left, where she put a different fabric on each of her limbs, so that while we were doing rotoscoping and taking the shots, we could tell where her limbs were because of the different fabric material in the shots. And we hadn't asked her to do that, but she knew enough to do it. It really helped out quite.
But after the rotoscoping, the patterns are what survives because the color gets lost. And she wasn't told to do that. This was just like this crazy patchwork, but it's thought through because you realize what the limitations and the advantages of the medium are.
She's an amazing motion lady. She also does whip work and was the woman hired to train at Lucas in how to actually crack whips for real instead of how they look on film.
Yep. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention this other thing for Josh. This is one of the rare promotional items that was given away for the zero tolerance for the different vendors like Toys R Us and those types of things. They did an ammo box, they painted zero tolerance on it, put all the flyers, inside, and then they went and took a toy gun and wrote zero tolerance, on the side. And there's a zero tolerance. I think Josh put a Mega Drive in there. There's the link cable, the original link cable to join the two. There's buttons. There's a T-shirt in here that says zero tolerance. We originally had 2 of these, but Scott and I were going through the airport coming back from a visit with 3D Realms, and the airport just did not seem to appreciate
An ammo can.
TSA. Well, they got really wound up about the gun, and so while I'm trying to negotiate with them and tell them, look, it's just a prototype, it's a promotional thing. Someone in the back is saying, should I push the button? Should I push the button? And I'm just like, no, I don't want you to push the button because I don't know what happens if you push the button. So we had to let the other one go. But this is one of them. And so Josh wanted me to mention this too is at the auction tonight.
This is a rare one. Randel has been sitting on this for decades. And if you are a true zero tolerance fan, and there are many, this is quite a collector piece.
The funny thing is it's got the cable in there.
The cable alone is worth anything you can bid on it. That's one of the original ones. And there aren't that many of them out there. They're all probably buried somewhere in Mexico. There's nobody sending in the damn postcards.
So I don't know how we're doing on time. We got time for a few questions? 3 minutes, okay.
Right, so this is, I want this to be some inspiration. A lot of times you look at this and you wonder, why are we doing this? Why are we coming to a show this big? Because the thing you're looking for is here. What is the motivation that keeps you doing this? Why are you reaching back into the games that were made before? The games that you can just walk in and buy. It's because the fundamentals, the foundations, the breakthroughs, they can be found in the evolution of the games. This is the evolution of a team. And I hope that the experience you take, I hope that you have at least the experience that we have had building this team. Most of these people never knew they would be on it. And now we've had a life experience that has made these friends forever.
Yeah.
It's this kind of synergy you get. The problem in the office is if any of these guys had to be very careful, because if they started a line from a movie, the movie would play out through the whole cube. So if you have friends like that, make them into developers if you have to. And if you have development groups, don't try to do this alone. Get a team together.
We ended up at Sony all together, working on the PlayStation 2 as one team. And the director, Shuhei Yoshida, came to me once and he goes, I see you've hired all your friends on your team.
Why wouldn't you?
And I said, well, that's not quite the right perspective. They're people I've worked with through my career that are really good and dedicated, so that's why they're here. And they became my friends. But
Well, the people I work with that still like me, you should hire us all.
She got me in an elevator one day and he goes, what do you do for Randel? And I go, anything he tells me to do.
Sir,
Sir, yeah. That's very Forrest Gump of you there.
we are
Sony
low
was
on...
the other place that there was a name that you picked that would never work.
We should get that on tape.
That's another story.
Should I cut him off? Yes, sir.
So we're at Sony, we're working on the PlayStation 2, we're putting it online for the first time, and Justin and I get a hold of the greatest name for the domain name for you to find all your fellow PlayStation 2, game players. So we secure the domain name, we're building the system for the servers, you to find the servers, find other players in the PlayStation 2. We go to the vice president of marketing, I'm not gonna mention his name, and we said, we got this name, it's great, it's called PlayStation Live. And he goes, that's the stupidest name I've ever heard in my life. And then 6 weeks later, Xbox announced Xbox Live.
Thank you very much for joining us and all the support you've given us.
Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and to the right are a few more videos from the Portland Retro Gaming Expo 2023. Thanks for watching.